Welcome to TINAH Talks, where time is not a healer, but we believe that we all have the power to heal ourselves and take our mental well being into our own hands. This podcast is a byproduct of TINAH, the mental well being marketplace, and a community platform at timeisnotahealer.com, providing you with the best products for your self healing journey. Hit subscribe and follow us on socials if you want support or to support us on your mental well being journey. I'm your host, Kelsey, and today I will be interviewing a good friend of mine and a therapist. Her name is Athena. And this episode is going to be all about internal family systems and how really we have different parts of ourselves and where that comes from and how we continue to integrate that and make ourselves whole today as adults. So, welcome, Athena. I'm really excited to have you. You're the first guest that I'm interviewing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and your background?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much. So I'm Athena. I am a licensed professional counselor in the state of Pennsylvania. I have been working as a therapist for, oh my goodness, like 8 years. It's wild to say. I started off working in substance use. I worked at an inpatient facility for people who struggled with substance use and also co-occurring mental health struggles. Since then, I have worked in outpatient with the substance use population. And over the last 2 or 3 years, I've been working in outpatient general mental health. So, doing a lot of work with clients who struggle with trauma, anxiety, depression. I also tend to work with substance use still and some clients who struggle with personality disorders.
So, basically, the whole population of the world, because we're all messed up.
Pretty much. Yeah. I think COVID, it's like really the struggles with anxiety, the struggles with reintegrating into the world. I see so much of that every day. So there's a lot of
Okay.
that comes up.
Nice. Yeah. Well, I mean, not nice for the people who are struggling with it, but no, it's we need more people. I know that right now, actually, in the field with therapists, we are lacking quite a bit. And it's not only
Mhm.
like a lack of people of providers, but it's also a lack of access, like an
Yeah.
inability to access it. And I know that's not just the US, that's all over the world. So love you for it, commend you for it, which just for a little background for our listeners, Athena and I have actually known each other since, was it freshman year of high
Oh,
school?
yeah.
Yeah, so we've known each other for a really, really long time, and she's one of I actually just did an episode where I got interviewed,
Oh, cool.
um, and so, like, sharing about things, I mentioned core friends and stuff, and so Athena's one of my core friends from high school, and I don't have that many from that period of time of life, and somehow she's stuck with my crazy butt, and here we are, and it's funny, I, like, started in the psych field, and then I've now transitioned out, and she didn't start there. She started
Yeah.
elsewhere and then transitioned into that. So it's been a little bit of a flip flop, but yeah, it's been really good to see how you've grown and what you've developed for yourself as a career. And I've heard you pull out a little bit of your counselor hat and you're fantastic at it. So
Oh, thank you.
um so today we wanted to talk about the concept of internal family systems, which I think a lot of people don't really know what that is. I think it's a relatively new therapeutic kind of theory. Like I didn't
Mhm.
learn that when I was in the field, but it's basically the concept is the family within you, right? Like
Yes.
we have, I mean, I'm not sure if you know, or many people understand this, but we have many parts of the self and that
Mhm.
make up who we are as a person. So maybe you could share a little bit about like what the theory of internal family systems is, and then how what that looks like as the parts of the self.
Sure. So the idea with internal family systems is that each of us have a core self. This core self is, there's 8 C's. I'm not going to remember them all, but it's confident, curious, compassionate. This is just a sense of really knowing. Like when we feel our values, those are really aligned with our core self. Then we
Okay.
have all of our parts of self. And the way that internal family systems kind of came to be, there's a practitioner, Dick Schwartz. He was actually trained in family therapy and he's doing individual therapy. And it's part of me wants this, and part of me hates this person, or part of me wants to go do this really impulsive thing. He's like, there's so much part language that comes up,
Hmm.
and kind of talking about ourselves in that way, I think became really stigmatized probably in the 90s when dissociative identity disorder, or kind of more mainstream known as like multiple personality disorder, was kind of all over the news. This idea that if we have
Yeah.
different versions of ourselves, it means that we're very disordered. But we really all talk about ourselves in this way.
Yeah.
Anytime we're making a decision, part of me wants this, part of me wants that. Looking at like internal family systems as a form of treatment, what we look at is that there are different types of parts. So we have parts of ourselves that are wounded. This could be the most common one is like our inner child. So if we experience neglect, trauma, we feel unseen, we're bullied, sometimes our inner child will become wounded. Then we develop all of these defenses, which are basically our coping skills to manage this. Some of them are adaptive, some of them not so much, but they kind of fall into two categories. We have our managers, and these are the parts of self that work to prevent us from having to feel anything that could trigger our wounded
Mhm.
part. So this is going to be isolation. This may be I'm going to people please, so I never have to disappoint anybody. Those are managers. Then we have firefighters. These are the ones that come in after we're triggered and they're like, we're just gonna take out everything and feel nothing. So this might be, I had a really rough week, so I'm gonna go get really drunk.
Mhm.
Or I'm going to use work in a maladaptive way and just go overwork because that'll
Mhm.
make everything feel better. I won't have to feel anything.
Yeah.
So looking at working with these parts, the goal is to get to that wounded part, figure out how to heal it, and integrate it into the self. Sounds like, oh, cool. But all of our different defenses make that really, really challenging because they don't want you to get to that wounded part. Um,
Right.
so it's a lot of negotiation and really figuring out how do we address what these managers and these firefighters need to feel safe.
Yeah, that is a really great description. So before hopping on the call, I was trying to do a little research of my own just because when I studied psych, this was not a theory that they were teaching in school.
Mhm.
And I also, my background in psych was in the clinical field. So this is definitely not a theory that we would be practicing on the unit at all whatsoever.
Yeah.
Um, and if people are wondering why I'm making that comment, is just kind of what she said here. There was this like, I know in the 90s it was big, like very like social big, but apparently in like 60s and 70s, I heard this from my old coworkers when DID, dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality disorder was really big. The
Mhm.
clinical units, they really like gave into it. They like played into it. And so it kind of ran rampant and like a little bit out of control. And so I think the industry swung in the other direction of, right, like we don't want to feed into that at all. Like if it comes up, if people are presenting with certain things like this, that they would address it as it comes, but it can be a little bit dangerous
Mhm.
to start being like, let's break down the parts of the self when they're already in a really difficult place of struggling.
Yes.
Right, thus being an inpatient psychiatric unit. So that's just a
Mhm.
little background for the readers. But I was doing a little bit of research on this, and you gave a really nice, like layman's terms
Good.
explanation. Fantastic, because I was reading some of it and I was like, wait. And I think the biggest misconception about internal family systems is that it has to do with the family, that you're thinking about
Mhm.
parts of the family
Mhm.
rather than parts of the self. Is
Yeah.
that pretty common, I would think?
Yes. Yeah, I think the name kind of skews it, but yes, it's internal family, but we think family
Yeah.
systems and there are sometimes parts where it's like, oh, that part's my mom or that part's my brother. But it
Yeah.
really is more just about our relationship within ourselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. And way to go, Dick, on the name. Come on, like figure it out.
Right.
What I was gonna point out though is like because you're like, oh, that's a part of my mom or that's a part of my dad. And I think, right, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here about how the different parts of our self form is a lot of response to our environment. It's a
Mhm.
response to what we're experiencing. And then so that's where like those coping, whether they're adaptive or maladaptive, come into play. So it's kind of like, oh, I see how my mom deals with difficulty, or I see how my dad deals with difficulty, or how they respond in everyday situations. And then you kind of absorb that as a kid and you learn that as a mechanism for coping in and of itself for you. And
Mhm.
then I know that our parents, our family unit is also a contributing factor to the emotional distress that we often experience.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes with bad intent, a lot of the times not. It's just,
Right.
you know what are I want to make this caveat for a lot of people. A lot of families, they have trauma, they have difficulties in it. And I think our parents often did the best they could with what they had.
Hmm.
Could some parents do a little bit better in trying to learn and mend themselves? Absolutely. But I'm going down a whole different route there. So yeah, so I think, could you talk a little bit about how these parts like formed and why, like where that influence comes in from the outside and to contribute to our internal narratives?
Sure, absolutely. And I think this is even looking at, not even looking so much at the wounded parts that maybe experience severe trauma. These are types of things we internalize that don't even necessarily meet a criteria for saying like that was trauma or even anything we really remember. So something
Right.
that, you know, it's April. I work with a lot of young women. Something that I'm seeing a lot this over the past couple of weeks is this internalized part of self that says, I need to be smaller or I need my body to look differently in order to have value this summer. And
Because I'm feeling that way. Like I'm feeling exactly that way.
it's cyclical. But this
Yeah.
is really, and we believe it because it's a part of ourself saying it. It's our
Mhm.
voice saying there is a higher value in being in a smaller body or a more toned body or whatever we place value
Mhm.
on. Or for some women who maybe feel underweight in a larger body. But basically a body that is different than our own. And this can come from just this messaging we receive. We maybe see mom always dieting or talking badly about
Mhm.
her body, or
Mhm.
we go on Instagram and all we
Mm.
see is Fitspo or girls in bikinis or lose 30 pounds in 30 days type of
Yep.
advertising. And
Yep.
we just say, okay, that must be what's right. And now there's this part of ourself that's very self critical that says,
Mhm.
you are not good enough because you are not that.
Yeah. No, it's so funny. You're like, "Ooh, you're hitting a little too close to home for me." I literally got off of Instagram. Now it'll be almost 2 weeks that I've been off of
Mhm.
Instagram, and I just needed to take a break. I've had a lot going on with work. I'm a little bit stressed out. We're planning for a trip where I'm going to be taking a full 3 weeks off, and then we'll still be traveling, but I'll be working after that. And so I just got a lot going on. And then with Instagram, I follow a lot of things that are like mental health oriented,
Mhm.
that are like health and wellness and like business stuff. And although like it can be motivating in the right times when I'm already stressed out, right?
Mhm.
Some of my habits have fallen by the wayside because I'm trying to hustle to get some things done before I go. So I'm not on top of my game in other areas. And I'm
Mhm.
seeing all these things and now it's making me feel like, oh God, I'm not doing enough, or I'm not doing
Yeah.
what I normally should be. I know what makes me feel good, da 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 da. And so I was like, fuck it, I can't do it. I'm turning it off. So I
Right.
turned it off.
And
Um,
that's this manager saying
yeah.
my self-critical part is coming out, which is probably
Mhm.
also a manager. Um, this is not feeling good for me. This is feeling triggering. I'm just going to avoid
Yeah.
this. Hmm.
Yeah, that's great. No, it's a good description. I mean, I think a lot of this plays into how self-aware are you, right? Because
Hmm.
like I think internal family systems comes down to learning what those different parts of you are.
Hmm.
What are the different things that, and I hate to use this word, I hate to say trigger because trigger is overused
Yeah.
in certain ways on social media and things like that. And
Hmm.
so we're not talking about trigger with PTSD or trauma
Correct.
or things like that. That's not what I'm referring to.
Hmm.
But like, where it just triggers that internal manager or it triggers that internal
Yeah.
firefighter, something that you're having a response to because you have a particular internal narrative around it. It sounds like family systems is really just all about that, being self-aware and then
Yep.
knowing how do you use them adaptively in a good way.
Sure. Sure. And so I also agree that I think the word trigger can sometimes be a bit overused.
Yeah.
I like using the word activated. It's a new one, so I will
Oh,
use trigger
I like that.
inappropriately sometimes, but I think that's, especially looking at this is a bit more of what we're talking about is like the activation of these different systems.
Yeah.
So part of it is going to be how do I understand when these parts are getting activated? How do I separate from them? Because looking at internal family systems, the idea is that when we have one of these parts get activated, what happens is it blends with ourself. So then we're not making the decision, this part of ourself is. So where confident Kelsey may say, I'm going to put on this swimsuit and have so much fun on my trip, and I'm not going to care what anybody thinks. This self-critical piece that may be saying, oh my gosh, like I don't have the body like that girl on Instagram. Maybe like, I'm going to put on my t-shirt, or I'm just going to think about how I look the whole time, and I'm not going to enjoy myself. And it just takes over.
I hate you a little bit right now that you're using the swimsuit example. Like, have you been in our house? I mean, I know you were here a few weeks ago, but have you been like creeping around? Did you plant a bug or something? Because literally, we went to the store 2 days ago. We had to get like socks and I had to buy Sean some new t-shirts. Sean's my boyfriend. And I was like, all right, I need a new swimsuit. I've got really cute frilly ones, but we're going to be doing a lot of intensive hiking. So I need one that's a little more like sturdy. And I was like looking at the swimsuits and I was like, I don't look good in any of these. And I wanted to get like a particular swimsuit that, I mean, I'm sure, to be honest, I looked fine. I looked great in all of them. It wasn't an issue, but I was like leaning towards the swimsuit that covers up more because I was feeling insecure. So great example with the swimsuit example. You're just, hitting the nail on the head. I feel like I'm getting a free therapy session here. Uh,
I think it just really shows also, how universal this messaging is to women, but that's a whole
oh my
different
God.
soapbox I could get on.
No, I mean, I think I saw prior to being off of Instagram, I saw someone posted like why us millennial women, because I'm 33, why we're so obsessive about weight and what we look like. And it was just a short, like little reel, but it was clips of all like 90s and 2000 videos from like TV ads, like not just TV shows, but like interviews and news and stuff like that. And it was all clips of how women were basically like the messaging that they were saying about their body or how people were commenting on their body and like vice versa. And I was like, wow, it makes a lot of sense. Like it was really driven home in almost everything that we were seeing in our outside environment.
Yeah. And not only was it just this value system of thin is better, but I think it was also really this focus of you are only your body, your whole value is your body.
Right.
Like you look at like interviews where they'd be interviewing two stars of a movie, and it's like, it's like, oh, like how'd you get into character for this scene to the male actor, and then for the woman it was, what was your diet for this movie? It's like, what?
Ridiculous. I think I know exactly the interview that you're talking about too. And can't remember the actress who it was. And then she gave the interviewer a lot of shit for it, which was like spot on.
Yeah.
So okay. So this whole idea, right, that we have these different parts of ourself, I think for a lot of people who don't have, right, because we're a big part of TINAH and what we're doing is we're trying to educate, we are trying to destigmatize. And I think like learning how to personally address these different parts of ourselves can be really, really scary. I think in general, with an awareness comes great responsibility. Once you're aware, you can no longer blindly ignore things. And so then you have to be responsible, which is another scary thing in and of itself. But what would you think, or what would you say is like, why it's hard for us to often like acknowledge or confront these different parts of ourselves? Because I think that's probably the biggest barrier to like healing, to getting on that journey.
Yeah. Usually comes down to fear. Like if we want to stay with this idea of the self-critical part, what I like to look at with my clients is, okay, like let's sit with this self-critical part. Let's look at the situation. So I'm just going to keep picking on you. And it's the swimsuit, right? Like the self-critical of, I can't wear this because I don't feel I look good in this swimsuit. Leaning into, okay, what is the fear here? What happens if you wear this swimsuit and you don't look good?
Right.
How can we support that part and really saying, okay, how do I play this fear out? Because usually it's based on some anxiety, some judgment that we fear we're going to receive. So this may be, well, I fear that people will judge me and think less of me. Or I fear that I'm going to be really uncomfortable and not be able to enjoy myself.
Mm-hmm.
Could be anything, right? Or I feel like I'm going to take
Right.
a picture and hate it and not want to post about my trip that I'm actually
Yes.
really excited to post about.
Right. Right.
So drilling down to what is it that this part is afraid of? Where do those fears come from? And then kind of looking and challenge that a little bit. Like, are these rooted in reality? Are they not?
Mm-hmm.
And I think also something that's really helpful in starting to address some of this is realizing that a lot of times these parts of ourselves, that self-critical part of you is not 33. And we were talking about this messaging that you received in the 90s and the early 2000s when you were
a teenager,
maybe.
preteen.
Right. So a lot of times we respond to our parts of self as though they're 33 like we are. Like, oh, shut up, stop it. That's stupid. Don't think that way. But if we switch that up and say, okay, this has been something that's been present since I was 13.
Mm-hmm.
How would I talk to so I have a niece who's 11. How would I talk to my 11-year-old niece?
Oh my God, she's 11. That's wild.
You're telling me. And she'll tell you she's 13 because she is so excited to be a teenager.
Okay.
But she is 11 until she'll be 12 soon. But I like to think, okay, like if my 11-year-old niece came to me and we were getting ready to go outside and play in the pool or whatever, and she goes, I can't wear this swimsuit because I look fat in it.
Mm-hmm.
How would I talk to her? I wouldn't say, shut up, that's stupid.
Right. Yeah, you definitely wouldn't say that. No, I love that because so you're touching on like a couple of different things here, which I might go on a tangent.
Sure.
So bear with me.
Yeah.
But like what you're talking about with identifying, is this based in reality? Well, first, how does it make you feel? Right? What are these are thoughts? How does it make you feel? Where do you feel that in your body? Like, is this based in reality? And then how can we slightly reframe it or adjust it? So this is pretty much rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy. That's a very CBT-esque sort of response.
That piece of it kind of is. We want to work with our part in a bit of that way, but it's also like a very Rogerian type of model, which is a very person-centered. I mean, Carl Rogers would barely talk during his sessions. He would just, kind of reminds me, if you've seen New Girl, of Nick's friend. He's like the classic Rogerian therapist.
That's funny. I never caught that before.
Oh, it's amazing. So it's kind of a mix of that, right? We do want to do some challenging. We want to say, okay, I get that you have this fear. Like, can we explore this? Can we look at it? Can we see how this fear came to be? Does it make sense? But also from a very supportive framework where we recognize that we're not trying to be punitive and say, that's irrational. Let's just not feel that anymore.
No, that makes it makes a lot of sense. And then this is like a total different segue side note. So, I do a lot of like breath work and things like that. And we've had a couple of episodes on things like this. So feel free to go listen to other episodes, guys. But one of the things that I found myself doing at the end of my breathing is like, if I've got some stressful things going on in my life, I tend to, at the end of my breathing, think of a version of myself, whether it's like when I was 5 or 10 or 15 or 25 or whatever that is feeling, for some reason I'm feeling pulled to, that I need to be like, hey, everything's going to be okay. And that's how I always end my breathing session, which I think makes sense because if I'm responding to external like stressors and pressures, and it's probably coming, it's activating a part of myself that has a narrative that's attached from a different period of time, like where in the point in time when I internalized it, right? Like maybe I internalized a lot of that when I was 16. And so I think maybe like I've naturally been doing that, like to my version of myself being like, it's okay, like we'll be fine, which I think is really, I just think is really cool. I'm you know me, I'm a psych nerd, even though I'm not in the field anymore. So I like to see how that like plays out in practice. Tell me I'm doing a good job.
Yeah, I think like that looks at this wounded piece, right? So saying, the breath work, it sounds like, is allowing you to have some of these managers and firefighters step back so you can access that part of you and say, and be the adult maybe that you needed to say, hey, you're going to get through this. Everything's going to be okay. Yeah.
I'm getting approval from a certified therapist right here. I'm winning at life, in case anyone was wondering. All right, so I've deterred quite a bit. I think we went down, okay, why it can be hard for us to acknowledge these parts. Why is it important that we actually like integrate these different parts of ourselves? I'd love
Sure.
to, yeah, hear about
Yeah.
that.
So I'm shocked I haven't brought this up yet, because usually this is one of the easiest ways that I describe internal family systems. So I probably should have started with it. And really embarrassing. I have not seen this movie, and I probably should, but the movie Inside Out, have you seen it?
Oh my God, love
So
it.
that's basically the idea of like, we have these different parts of ourselves, our angry part,
Yeah.
our happy part, our joyous part.
Hmm.
When we don't have integration there, and let's say anger comes up, anger can run the show.
Right.
So basically, when we're not really working with these parts of ourselves, they feel so neglected that they feel like they don't have any opportunity to do anything but take over. So I see this a lot with anxiety, self-criticism, anger,
Hmm.
where a client may say like, oh, I picked something up and threw it across the room. Like, that is so not like me. I don't know what
Hmm.
happened, but I felt like it was an out of body experience.
Right.
Yeah, this like, I felt like I was watching it.
Yeah.
Anger came in and took over. You didn't have a say there. Or when we get
Hmm.
so anxious that we kind of feel frozen.
Yeah.
Anxiety is taking over. We no longer are having a say. So when we don't build these relationships with the parts of ourselves, they feel like they
Hmm.
have to yell at us.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's the whole theory, not the theory, but call it anecdote, metaphor. I'm not sure, but where the tea kettle boils over, right? Where
Yes.
there's a lot of chaos happening, and then one ends up boiling over and takes over the moment.
Right, right. So
Hmm.
being fully integrated means that something comes up. Let's say you get in a fight with your partner,
Yeah.
and usually you're defensive and angry, and then you stonewall them. When you're fully integrated, you can feel, oh, I'm getting angry. I want to
Hmm.
get defensive. Let me listen to this anger. We're angry because we're not feeling heard, or we're feeling really disrespected. Let's listen
Hmm.
to this defensiveness. Here are all the reasons that I feel like I'm justified in this anger, that I'm
Right.
justified in whatever I'm complaining about.
Right.
Our integrative self can say, okay, so how am I going to take this information from anger, take this information from defensiveness? How do I want to
Hmm.
present this? You get to choose,
Right.
because they're feeling heard. They feel like you know them, you know what they're
Hmm.
afraid of, you know what they need, you know how to support them. You're listening to them on a regular basis. I think this is a big
Hmm.
one with people pleasing. When we just say yes to everybody all of the time, our parts don't
Yeah.
trust us. So they're
Right.
gonna
Makes
take
a lot of
over.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It
So when
makes
we
a
have
lot
that
of
trust,
sense.
it's, yeah, there's just more collaboration. And then the self gets to choose how we respond.
And then this would be my guess, is that when you're coming from a place of a little more connectedness and groundedness, I'm not saying you're grounded when you're angry, but like if
Mhm.
you are coming from the integration, you are slightly more grounded. You're going to be able to communicate. You're going to be able to react a lot better
Yeah.
outwardly. Like once you choose between, looking at all the different parts and what's happening, you can choose to react in a different way, in a way that's
Mhm.
probably going to benefit you better,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, it allows you to be assertive, because you're not having aggression take over, or you're not just retracting into self and being a people pleaser and being passive. You're saying, okay, here's what's coming up. Here's how I'm feeling. This is what I need for this problem to be better. You're
Yeah.
really able to address it wholly, rather than kind of
Mhm.
coming at it really fragmented.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Is this like a practice that you maybe like not consciously outwardly use in your practice with your clients? Is it something that's like always lingering in the background, or are you actively using it a lot with your patients, clients?
It depends. I have a handful of clients. So like, I advertise that IFS is one of the theories that I pull from quite a bit.
Mhm.
I'm in the second round of potentially getting into an IFS training. They are historically impossible to get into. It's like a whole lottery
Okay.
system. So fingers crossed, I will be doing that this year. Um,
Okay.
so I do advertise that I use IFS. So there are clients where we do a lot of IFS. We are finding parts in the body. We are
Mm,
negotiating with managers. We're negotiating with firefighters. We are going in. We are healing wounds. We are doing all of that integration in like a very formal
yeah.
IFS process.
Yeah.
There are a lot of clients where I kind of use it as part of the tools.
Yeah.
So kind of looking at it maybe from more of like a Gestalt. Gestalt was also like a parts type of person. He was parts of a whole.
Yeah.
He would do a lot of like, okay, let's have your anger sit in this chair and talk to the
Yeah.
sad part of you. And then he would get up and go in the other chair and be the sad part. So sometimes I'll do kind of that approach where I'll like help facilitate a communication between parts of self, usually around decision making. So it really depends on what works with the client. There have been clients where we've tried leaning into IFS and it's just a little too woo-woo for them. So it's like, all right,
Yeah.
we'll stick to CBT. You seem to do well with something very structured. So
Yeah.
yeah, it really just depends on where the client's at and what works best for
Mm-hmm.
them.
Now you mentioned earlier, like parts of self being like inner child. And I think that can sometimes, right? So I am the furthest from woo woo. Like I'm not a woo woo person. I know that spirituality and things like that, it has its place in time and everything. And people benefit from different approaches and different tools. From a lot of my traveling, especially like Southeast Asia and like the different spiritual communities, like it's really big in the traveling community. Would you say that this whole like inner child movement, because it's pretty big right now, doing like shadow work and inner child, is a lot of this attached to IFS, or is that just like a component that was pulled from it?
So shadow work is more, oh my gosh, who is that? Adlerian, I believe.
I wouldn't,
So
yeah, I wouldn't know.
so he viewed the shadow as, I'm going to use parts language just because I'm in that mode right now. Our shadow is like the part of ourselves that we feel we need to hide. We feel like we're ashamed
Okay.
of. So shadow would be, and it's usually found by kind of how we judge others. So
Okay.
if somebody is always late, and like, oh, I can't stand that person, they're always late. There's probably a part of us that wants to be able to take our time and wishes people would respect our time more and wishes we would respect our time more. So that's kind of our shadow there. So shadow work, inner child work, I like to think of it very similarly to parts of self, but it probably is a little bit more specifically Adlerian. But you can view it that way. And one of the great things about IFS is that we can choose to label or name our parts whatever makes sense for us. So if our social media is full of inner child and shadow stuff, then great. If we're really visiting and working with this 4-year-old version of yourself and you want to say my inner child, that's what we'll call her. If you want to call her Susan, we'll call her Susan. Like whatever you want to do. So you can kind of pick the language, but I think they can work together really well. But it is a little bit different theory.
I think just based on how you're describing it, I think it's probably really important to differentiate, like, labeling these different parts. You can call them Susan or Susie Q or John Smith or whatever. This is not saying that these are different personalities that exist within you that have the power to take over and be a completely, like, present in a completely different way. So multiple personality disorder. I think it's just important for people who are listening, two very separate things.
Yes. Yeah. So I have some clients where they'll just stick with the emotion, my anxious self, my critical self, my fearful self. And I have some clients who say, oh, that self, like that's my mom's voice. So I'm going to name that Brenda, because that's my mom's name, making that up. Or sometimes they say, wow, this is a part of myself that's actually like really confrontational and sassy and like confident. And that's not me, but I like to think of that as like this kind of name. So sometimes it's fun to
alter ego.
To just identify them. But no, it's not saying that this is something that takes over in a sense, like somebody who struggles with dissociative identity disorder.
Right.
It's not an identity, it's a part.
Not an identity part. Great clarification. All right, cool. Well, I think like the biggest question, and probably what maybe a lot of people are wanting to hear, is how the hell do we do this? How do
Yes.
we use IFS to help our, like, on our own self-healing
Mhm,
journey? How do we integrate the different parts of
mhm.
ourselves as we're trying to work on our own mental well-being?
Yeah. I think that first part is kind of like you had said, recognizing that we do have
Hmm.
these different parts of self. Sometimes this is where the labeling can be helpful. So if we notice that we're having a really self-critical day and we
Yeah.
have these thoughts just berating us all day, being able to
Hmm.
separate that from the true self. Oh, this is the self-critical part of me saying this. That can sometimes just in itself be so freeing to say, that's not me.
Right.
This is a part of me that is probably trying to be helpful. She's doing the best she can.
Yeah.
And she probably was helpful at one point in her life. So, really acknowledging
Right.
we're not looking to say, this is a bad part of me or I hate this part of me. All parts served a purpose at one point,
Right.
maladaptive or adaptive. So, just being
Yeah.
able to acknowledge, okay, this is coming up.
Hmm.
What's activating the self-critical part of me? Is this something that I need to look at, to meditate on? Am I avoiding something
Hmm.
here? A lot of times we'll avoid things that make us anxious or fearful. So it can really
Hmm.
help us highlight what we want to look at, what we want to maybe sit with. Um, Another thing that can be helpful if we feel like we are inundated by our parts and we just can't
Right.
find a way to unblend and really integrate. Um, Dick Schwartz has a book. I have it here. It's called No Bad Parts. And there's
Okay.
a visualization in here that's really
Hmm.
helpful where he kind of walks you through how to do it, but you do it independently, where you're like standing at the beginning of a path. I am
Hmm.
at, there's a path by my house. I take my dog there. In about like 2 or 3 weeks, path like on both sides, it's just purple flowers everywhere. So this is the path that I imagine when I do this visualization. And you
Right.
stand at the front of the path and you kind of turn to your parts and you say, hey, I'm just going to take this little walk. I will be back, but I want you to stay here. And
Mm.
you just ask them permission, like, hey, I'm just going to walk down this path and I'm going to ask that you wait
Mhm.
here. And you walk down the path. And as those parts start to come in, because they will, oh, this is
Mhm.
stupid. This is silly. You just go,
Mhm.
okay, hey, self criticism. Can you just go back to the front of the path and wait for me? Just practicing
Yeah.
this separation so that we can start to
Mhm.
feel what it feels like to be in self. Because I think so many of us are just always so blended.
Right.
Teaching ourselves to have that break and practicing that visualization can be helpful. And then it also builds trust with our parts because we come back.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's a little bit of a combination. I mean, I guess like visualization is a type of meditation.
Mhm.
Um, what I think of, like, when I way back when, what's the app? It's Headspace.
Mhm.
So, which I really like. Headspace is a great app. But the way that they talk about it, because like certain parts, like when you say self-critical part, to me, I just think about, oh, those are my thoughts. Those are
Mm.
narratives, they're just thoughts. That doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily mean that they hold weight. But
Yeah.
with Headspace, what they do a combination of visualization when they're trying to
Mhm.
teach you, when you do the beginners, like how to meditate. It's about letting those thoughts pass by like cars, but you're not getting
Mhm.
into the car. You're not
Right.
jumping into the car and going for the ride. You're just like, okay, I'm just going to let that pass and not attach myself to it,
Mhm.
creating that separation. Which I think for a lot of people, when I started meditating, was incredibly hard. And so I like the
Yes.
component of that visualization of like you're a little more in control. Like, I'm going to go walk down this path, but you all have to stay the fuck here.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it teaches you that you don't have to be so integrated with it and that you can ask
Yeah.
them to step back. So even if you're
Hmm.
noticing, oh, I'm getting really activated right now, can I ask this to step back? So if you're faced with a
Right.
decision, and let's say the decision is, do I take a 3 week break from work? And it's,
Mhm.
oh no, what's going to happen? Am I going to fall behind? Are people going to pick somebody else? Right. Being able to say, okay, these are anxious thoughts. I wonder if anxiety could take a step back while I think about
Mhm.
this, just so you can
Mhm.
see what else comes up. It doesn't mean we're
Right.
not listening to anxiety. Those are valid fears,
Right.
but let me see what else is here too.
Right. There's lots of all other options in the
Mhm.
world outside of what our immediate reaction is, because a lot of that time that comes from an internalized,
Yeah.
learned like narrative that we had.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay. So it sounds like, just to recap for our listeners, a lot of like how to integrate the different parts of ourselves is really first and foremost is getting first aware of what
Mhm.
those different parts are. How are we typically responding to things? How are we, whether that's outwardly to others or to ourselves, right?
Yes.
So having that self-awareness. And then the next step would be like, how do we create a little bit of space to detach between
Mhm.
those parts to see where we can have a little bit, I don't know, a sense of control over like, this is like we have this part and we can acknowledge you and we see you're
Yep.
there and we'll listen to you, but in like a more regulated way.
Yes. Self gets to make the final decision rather than
Right.
the parts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then after that, right, creating a little bit of the separation, what
Mhm.
would you say is like the next like active step of like kind of integrating? Because I think, I mean, or maybe that's just those two parts and it's just practicing that over and over again.
Yeah, if we're looking at like the managers and the firefighters, that can usually be enough. Sometimes there needs to
Hmm.
be some trust building. So
Hmm.
this might be even like asking this part of ourselves, like what do you need to see me do in order to build trust? What do you need to do to see me as a competent adult? This may be your part saying, I need you to start not overworking. Like you're signed up for 40
Hmm.
hours a week and you're working 50 every week. I don't trust that you're going to stand up for us. So I'm going to stay
Hmm.
here. So it might be that you have to prove to your parts that you're trustworthy, that you can do what they need in order for them to feel
Hmm.
comfortable being integrated. When we start looking at wounded parts, it gets a little bit more tricky, because then we're looking at really going back and sometimes healing traumas.
Right. Yeah.
And in that, we're really looking at like trying to step in and be what we needed. And sometimes we need
Hmm.
some guidance in that process,
Right.
um, because we're going to have all of our managers and firefighters coming out being like, absolutely not, you're not getting to that version of us.
Yeah.
So that can be a little bit trickier without some
Hmm.
guidance if there is trauma there to work through
Yeah.
this with IFS. But if it is these more, unfortunately, like universal struggles that we face with
Hmm.
self-criticism, anxiety, those can be worked out independently by just having more awareness and building a relationship with these parts of ourselves.
Right. Which, well, I guess like come full circle, that would be maybe journaling
Hmm.
about like these different topics or these
Hmm.
thoughts or these ideas, and meditation and
Yeah.
visualization.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And in that meditation, like sitting with that part, if we're feeling
Hmm.
especially self-critical, being like, okay, I'm just going to find that part in my body. A lot of
Hmm.
times anxiety and criticism, they live right here or right here.
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
I'm going to find it in my body and I'm just going to sit with it and I'm going to talk to it. Say like, what do you
Hmm.
need? What's going on? What's coming up for you? How can I support you?
Hmm.
Um, it feels funky,
Yeah. Feels a little wooey for a lot of people out there.
but we do it anyway. If we take a
Yeah.
step like through meditation, we'll notice that a lot of times we're talking to ourselves in our head anyway. We might as
Yeah.
well do it for
100%.
good.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, part of what this like makes me, what you just described there, is a little bit of a body scan, which is a little more
Yes.
structured. So,
Mhm.
just for like the listeners, if you guys are wondering, okay, how the hell do I sit with myself and feel what I need to feel in my body? There's a really good tool called a body scan that you can do. And that's where you're identifying like where you're holding emotions in your body. But then you could take it a step further with what Athena is suggesting in really sitting and kind of talking to that version of yourself. Like, okay, I've figured out where I'm holding this emotion or whatever it is, this part of myself that I'm
Mhm.
feeling in my body. And what is it trying to tell me?
Yes.
How can I work with it? How can we address it? How can we work together to move forward?
Mhm.
And maybe that comes with a little bit of doing the body scan, a little bit of that internal visualization meditation.
Mhm.
And then, I mean, I'm a big advocate for journaling, and I think it can be really helpful to, right, get your thoughts out on paper so it's not stewing up in your head, and it creates a little bit of that detachment, and to help you kind of process it as you're actually thinking about it. But
Yeah.
it sounds like those are all really, because I want people to have concrete little
Mhm.
takeaways.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, is there anything else around IFS or just around your experiences in the therapeutic world or your own personal world that you wanted to share about or talk about?
Hmm.
Hmm.
I don't know, you're putting me on the spot.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. If you don't have anything, that's okay. I got one more question that'll put you on the spot.
sure. Oh goodness. Yeah, I just have to say, like, I find that this modality has been so powerful with the clients who give it a shot. There is a little bit of resistance sometimes, but
Mhm.
it has it has opened up things to explore and different ways of being. And I've just seen so many clients show up so differently week after week
Mhm.
following this and really leaning into looking at themselves through a parts lens.
Yeah.
That it's completely won me over. Because the first time I heard about it, I was like, you want me to have people talk to themselves? Like they're gonna be like, this therapist is trying to make me feel like I'm absolutely nuts, so I keep going to her forever. Like that is not
Right.
my goal.
Yeah.
But yeah, the people who really lean into it and get into digging into that stuff and
Mhm.
really going inward, I see them show up in their daily lives differently, like week over week. So it's just been a
Yeah.
really powerful tool. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I believe it. I think there are a lot of other modalities with CBT
Hmm.
and that are applied. They're different, but they're applied with the same end goal. And I
Yeah.
think right at the end of the day, when you take the time to really like dive deep into yourself and try to figure out what you need to be, maybe the parent you never had, or
Mhm.
to be the parent that you now need because you're an adult and adulting is really hard, right?
Yeah.
Like
Hmm.
this can be really really helpful. And so I like the first time when like hearing about it, I also was like, oh, this is an interesting theory, I don't know about it. But like a little bit of research and then also talking to you, I mean it sounds like it's a really great tool for people. And so that brings me to a point that I forgot. Like another resource, guys, is therapists, right? Find someone if this is a type of modality you'd like to explore for yourself and you tried to do it a little bit on your own. It can often be hard to really break those parts down. I think
Hmm.
like I know for myself, being so self-aware all the time is
Hmm.
difficult. Like you need
Yes.
a sounding board to like piggyback off of and
Hmm.
have them kind of put their insights and kind of reflect what it is that you're actually doing and saying. So
Yeah.
if you feel like it's a little too much to do on your own, by all means, like we always recommend to seek professional help, and to find someone if you can, if the resources are available to
Hmm.
you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, yeah. So my last question to you, what is your personal, this is an easy one, but on the spot, what's your personal favorite tool for you in what you've done in your own self-healing journey?
Ooh. Oh my goodness. So I have found that this is totally like a sidebar. For me personally, like being able to consistently find movement that I really enjoy has been life changing for me. It's changed the way that my parts talk to each other. Like talking about body image stuff. Like by no means do I feel like I could, be on the cover of Sports Illustrated, nor do I want to. But being able to like really lean into movement that makes me feel good in my body changes how I feel about my body. It's completely changed my mental health. And the my favorite form of exercise is strength training. I found that that's the most beneficial for me because unlike some other forms of self-help or even professional help where the change is so gradual and it's kind of like,
Hmm.
how do I know if I'm getting better? You know if you lifted up more weight or not. You know if you did more reps or not. So being able to see that growth and then because change in your body from exercise does not happen immediately, but you can get strong really quick. So that's
Yeah.
been probably the biggest game changer for me. And I promote a very holistic approach to mental health. Like I feel talk therapy has a role, what you
Yeah.
eat has a role, how you move has a role, how much time you spend inside and outside has a role. So that's probably been the biggest piece for me.
I love it because I've also had the same experience with body movement, but mine's yoga. So a little
Yeah.
different.
Oh, and I
But
love yoga too, but yoga is what keeps me from getting hurt so I can keep lifting.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, awesome. Well, I appreciate you, taking the time to come on the show and let me pepper you with a whole bunch of questions, personal and professional.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
been really
Thank you so much
great
for having me.
having you. Yeah, of course. Hopefully we'll have you again in a whole new topic. Stay tuned,
Yes.
people. um, all right. Well, guys, thanks for listening to our episode today. If this has resonated with you, be sure to give us a like, and we'd love to hear your feedback in the comments about what topics you'd like to hear more about. Don't forget to subscribe, follow us on socials, and join the community at timeisnotahealer.com. All the details can be found in the episode description below. Remember, you hold the power to heal. Until next time, you got this.